The wind clawed through the narrow alley, cold and sharp as a knife. Alex's breath came out in shuddering clouds, her heart racing as she walked faster. The darkness seemed alive here, pressing against her like a suffocating weight. The shortcut through the old part of town was supposed to save time, but instead, it felt like the beginning of a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Her footsteps echoed unnaturally on the cobblestone streets, each step louder than it should have been, as though the darkness amplified every sound. The air was heavy with dampness, carrying a faint, rotten smell that made her stomach churn. She clutched her bag tightly, her fingers numb from the cold. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck 12. The hollow chimes reverberated through the empty streets, marking the start of a new day, or perhaps the end of something she couldn't yet name. The street lamps flickered weakly, their light swallowed by the oppressive shadows. Ahead, one of them sputtered and died, leaving a stretch of the street cloaked in complete darkness. Alex hesitated, her heart pounding. She pulled her phone from her pocket and switched on the flashlight, the thin beam cutting through the gloom but offering little comfort. Just a few more blocks, she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Just keep going. But then she heard it, a sound so faint she thought she'd imagined it at first. A whisper, soft and fleeting, carried on the wind. Alex froze, her breath hitching. She turned her head, shining her flashlight into the shadows behind her. The beam revealed only cracked walls and piles of debris. No movement. No one there. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the unease. It's just the wind, she muttered, forcing herself to keep walking. But as she moved, the whisper came again, closer this time. It wasn't just a sound, it was words. Indistinct but urgent, like someone calling her name from far away. Hello. Alex called out, her voice cracking. The whispering stopped, replaced by a deep silence that felt heavier than the air. She shivered, glancing around. The street was empty, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her pace quickened, her shoes slapping against the stones with nervous energy. She was almost at the end of the alley when a shadow moved at the edge of her vision. She whipped her flashlight toward it, her pulse hammering. The light landed on a figure standing just a few feet away, shrouded in darkness. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. It was tall and still, its features obscured by the shadows. Alex took a step back, her hands trembling as she gripped her phone. The figure tilted its head slightly, as though studying her. Then it spoke, its voice low and hollow. "You shouldn't have come here." Alex's blood ran cold. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to. I was just passing through." The figure took a step closer, its movements unnaturally smooth. "It's too late for apologies," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "The Keeper knows you're here." "The Keeper?" Alex repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Her legs felt rooted to the spot, fear paralyzing her. Who is that?" The figure raised an arm, pointing down the alley. Alex turned her head slowly, her flashlight illuminating a massive wrought iron gate that hadn't been there before. The gate loomed tall and foreboding, its intricate design depicting twisted, shadowy figures. Beyond it, there was only darkness, a void so deep it seemed to swallow the light. "What is this?" Alex asked, her voice shaking. She turned back to the figure, but it was gone. The alley was empty once more, save for the gate that now dominated her view. Panic surged through her. She spun on her heel, ready to run back the way she'd come. But the alley stretched endlessly in both directions. The buildings seemed taller, the shadows darker, as though the space itself had warped around her. No, she muttered, her breathing quickening. She turned back to the gate, its iron surface glinting faintly in her flashlight's beam. Something about it drew her in, despite the terror clawing at her chest. She stepped closer, her feet moving as if not entirely under her control. The gate creaked open as she approached, the sound grating against her ears. Beyond it, the darkness seemed to pulse, alive and waiting. Alex hesitated at the threshold, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. But there was nowhere else to go. The alley had trapped her, forcing her forward. "Just a dream," she whispered, trying to convince herself. "This isn't real." She stepped through the gate. The darkness enveloped her instantly, the air growing colder and thicker. Her flashlight flickered, the beam barely cutting through the void. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding her on all sides. They were no longer words, but a cacophony of voices, rising and falling in a haunting rhythm. Alex stumbled forward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The ground beneath her feet felt uneven, shifting with each step. Shapes moved in the corners of her vision, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, until they seemed to form a single word. Run. She didn't need to be told twice. She broke into a sprint, her flashlight bobbing wildly in her hand. The darkness pressed closer, the air growing colder with each step. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she didn't dare stop. Ahead, a faint light appeared, distant but steady. Alex ran toward it, desperation driving her forward. The light grew brighter, revealing a stone archway carved with strange symbols. Beyond it was a dimly lit courtyard, the center dominated by a massive black obelisk that pulsed with an unnatural glow. Alex stumbled into the courtyard, collapsing to her knees. The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of her ragged breathing. She looked up at the obelisk, its surface smooth and cold, its glow hypnotic. Despite everything, she felt drawn to it, compelled to touch it. As her hand reached out, a voice echoed through the courtyard, deep and resonant. "You have entered the Keeper's domain." Alex froze, her hand hovering inches from the obelisk. She turned slowly, her flashlight revealing another figure standing at the edge of the courtyard. This one was taller than the first, its form shifting and flickering like smoke. Its eyes burned with a pale blue light, unblinking as they bore into her. "Why are you here?" the figure demanded, its voice reverberating through the space. "Do you seek the Keeper's judgment?" Alex shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know why I'm here," she cried. "I just want to leave. Please, let me go." The figure stepped closer, its movements fluid and unnerving. "No one leaves once they enter the endless night," it said. "You must face the Keeper." Before Alex could respond, the ground beneath her began to crack. Shadows poured from the fissures, swirling around her like a living storm. The obelisk's glow intensified, and the air filled with a deafening hum. Alex screamed, her voice lost in the chaos as the shadows engulfed her completely. Alex gasped for air as she felt herself falling, her body weightless yet pressed by an invisible force. The shadows around her twisted and writhed, pulling at her limbs as if trying to anchor her in the void. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to wake up from this nightmare. But the cold, biting air and the echo of distant whispers reminded her that this was no dream. When the sensation of falling stopped, Alex opened her eyes cautiously. She found herself lying on a cold, hard surface. The air was damp and carried the faint metallic tang of decay. The world around her was dimly lit by an eerie blue glow emanating from veins of light that ran through the ground, spreading out like spiderwebs. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaking beneath her. Her flashlight had gone out, but it didn't seem to matter. The faint blue light provided just enough illumination to see her immediate surroundings. She was in a cavernous space, its walls jagged and uneven. The ceiling stretched high above, disappearing into the darkness, while strange symbols glowed faintly on the stone walls, pulsating like a heartbeat. "Where am I?" Alex whispered, her voice trembling. "The Keeper's realm," a voice answered, low and resonant. Alex spun around, her heart racing, but there was no one there. The voice came again, echoing off the walls. "You have trespassed where you do not belong." Alex's breath quickened. "I didn't mean to," she said, her voice shaking. "I don't even know how I got here. I just want to go home." The cavern seemed to shift around her, the blue veins of light flickering. The voice, now closer, spoke again. "Once you enter the Keeper's domain, there is no escape without judgment." "Judgment?" Alex repeated, her chest tightening. "I don't understand." The ground beneath her trembled, and a section of the cavern wall cracked open, revealing a passage shrouded in darkness. The faint blue light did little to penetrate the shadows within. The voice, now colder, commanded, "Step forward." Alex hesitated, fear rooting her to the spot. The whispers began again, louder this time, surrounding her like a chorus of accusations. They spoke in fragmented phrases, their words dripping with malice. "You shouldn't be here. You are not worthy. The Keeper is waiting. I don't have a choice, do I?" Alex said aloud, her voice barely audible over the whispers. She took a tentative step toward the passage, her hands trembling. The cold seemed to intensify with each step she took, the blue light fading as the darkness consumed her. The passage twisted and turned, the walls narrowing until Alex had to squeeze through tight spaces. The air grew heavier, making it harder to breathe. Strange symbols etched into the walls glowed faintly, illuminating the path just enough for her to see. The whispers followed her, growing louder and more distinct, as though they were coming from just behind her shoulder. Then she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the passage. They weren't hers. Alex froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She turned her head slowly, her eyes straining to see into the darkness behind her. "Is someone there?" she called out, her voice trembling. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant drip of water echoing through the cavern. Alex's breath came in shallow gasps as she clutched the cold stone wall for support. "It's nothing," she whispered to herself, trying to steady her nerves. "Just keep moving." As she continued down the passage, the air grew colder still, and a faint, flickering light appeared ahead. It cast long, distorted shadows that danced on the walls, making them appear alive. Alex's footsteps slowed as she approached the source of the light. The passage opened into a circular chamber. At its center stood a pedestal carved from black stone, its surface etched with the same glowing symbols that lined the walls. Resting on the pedestal was a small, ornate box. The box pulsed with an otherworldly light, shifting between hues of blue and green. The air around it felt heavy, charged with a strange energy that made Alex's skin prickle. She approached cautiously, her eyes fixed on the box. Something about it drew her in, an irresistible pull that she couldn't explain. But as she reached out to touch it, the whispers erupted into a deafening roar, and the ground beneath her feet shook violently. "Stop," a voice bellowed, louder and more commanding than before. Alex stumbled back, her hand retreating from the box. The light around the pedestal flared, and a figure emerged from the shadows. The Keeper stood before her, towering and cloaked in darkness. His form was indistinct, shifting and flickering like smoke, but his eyes burned with a pale, piercing light. His presence filled the chamber, oppressive and overwhelming. Alex felt her knees weaken, and she sank to the ground, unable to look away. "You dare to touch what is not yours?" The Keeper's voice boomed, reverberating through the chamber. "I didn't mean to," Alex stammered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know. I don't even know why I'm here." The Keeper tilted his head, his burning eyes narrowing. "You are here because you crossed into my domain," he said. "And now, you must answer for it." "Answer for what?" Alex cried, tears streaming down her face. "I just want to go home." The Keeper raised a hand, and the symbols on the walls flared brightly. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an oppressive silence. The chamber seemed to expand, the shadows deepening around Alex. Images began to form in the darkness, fragments of memories, moments from her life that she had tried to forget. She saw herself arguing with a friend, the words she had spoken cutting and cruel. She saw the times she had lied, moments of selfishness and cowardice. Each image struck her like a blow, and she recoiled, her hands covering her face. "These are the shadows of your soul," the keeper said, his voice cold and unyielding. "They bind you, weigh you down. If you wish to leave this place, you must confront them." Alex shook her head, her voice breaking. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't face this." "You have no choice," the keeper replied. "The truth cannot be avoided. It must be faced." The shadows closed in around her, their shapes growing more distinct. They spoke in voices she recognized, voices filled with anger and disappointment. "You failed us," they said. "You abandoned us. You let us down." Alex sobbed, her body trembling. "I'm sorry," she cried. "I didn't mean to. I didn't know how to fix it." The keeper watched silently, his eyes unblinking. "Regret is meaningless without resolve," he said. "Will you continue to run from your past, or will you confront it?" Alex wiped her tears, her chest heaving with each breath. She forced herself to stand, her legs shaking, but her resolve hardening. She looked into the shadows, her voice trembling but determined. "I made mistakes," she said. "I hurt people. But I can change. I can do better." The shadows paused, their forms wavering. The keeper stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Do you truly believe that?" he asked. Alex met his gaze, her voice steady. "Yes, I have to." The shadows dissolved, the light in the chamber growing brighter. The keeper's eyes burned intensely as he spoke. "Then you may continue. But know this, the path forward will." The light in the chamber faded as Alex stepped forward, leaving the shadows of her past behind. Her legs felt heavy, her chest still tight with the weight of what she had faced. But deep within her, a flicker of resolve had taken root. She had confronted the keeper and emerged with the faintest glimmer of hope. Now, she had to move forward, even if the path ahead was unknown. The keeper's voice echoed in her mind as she walked. "The path forward will test you. It will strip you bare and reveal the truth of who you are. Only then can you earn the right to leave the endless night." Alex's steps faltered as the chamber dissolved into darkness once more. The blue veins of light reappeared on the ground, guiding her like a trail of embers. The air grew colder, and a low hum resonated through the void, vibrating in her chest. She tightened her grip on the lantern, its sickly green glow flickering as though it, too, feared what lay ahead. The trail led her to another passage, narrower than before. The walls pressed close on either side, and the ceiling dipped so low she had to stoop as she moved forward. The whispers returned, faint at first, but growing louder with each step. They seemed different now, less accusatory and more desperate. "Help us," one voice pleaded, its tone filled with sorrow. "Don't leave us here," another cried, trembling with despair. Alex's heart clenched. She paused, her eyes scanning the narrow passage, but there was no one there. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Where are you?" The whispers didn't answer directly, but they grew louder, overlapping in a chaotic symphony of grief and longing. Alex pressed on, her breath quickening. The walls seemed to pulse with the voices, the blue veins of light dimming and brightening in time with their cries. The passage opened suddenly into a vast cavern. The ceiling was impossibly high, disappearing into darkness, and the floor was littered with jagged stones that glowed faintly. At the center of the cavern stood a massive, crumbling structure, a tower that stretched upward like a skeletal hand grasping for the void above. Its surface was covered in the same glowing symbols that lined the walls of the passage, but these symbols pulsed erratically, as though alive and struggling. The cries of the whispers seemed to emanate from the tower itself. Alex approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing on the stone floor. As she drew nearer, she saw movement within the tower's cracks and crevices. Shadows writhed and twisted, their forms vaguely human but distorted and incomplete. Their glowing eyes watched her, filled with a mixture of hope and anguish. "You have come," one of the shadows said, its voice resonating through the cavern. "We have waited so long." Alex stopped, her body trembling. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The Tower of Sorrows," the shadow replied. "A prison for those who cannot move on. We are bound here, caught between worlds, forgotten by all." "Why?" Alex asked, her heart aching at the pain in the shadow's voice. "Why are you trapped here?" The shadows shifted, their forms flickering like dying flames. "We failed the Keeper's trials," the shadow said. "We could not face our truths, and so we were bound to this place, unable to move forward or return." Alex swallowed hard, her grip on the lantern tightening. "What do you want from me?" The shadow closest to her extended a hand, its fingers barely more than wisps of smoke. "Free us," it said. "You have faced your own truth and passed the first trial. You have the strength to break the bonds that hold us here." Alex hesitated, her gaze flicking between the shadows and the crumbling tower. "How?" she asked. "What do I have to do?" The shadows pulled back slightly, their forms dimming. "The tower is our anchor," one of them said. "Its heart binds us to this place. Destroy it, and we will be free." Alex took a step back, her mind racing. "And what happens to me if I do this?" The shadows didn't answer immediately. Their forms flickered, their eyes dimming. "The Keeper will know," one of them said finally. "He will not be pleased. But you will have done what we could not. You will have shown mercy." Alex's chest tightened. The thought of angering the Keeper sent a wave of fear through her, but the despair in the shadows' voices was impossible to ignore. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling as she said, "I'll try." The shadows pulled back, retreating into the cracks of the tower. The whispers grew softer, replaced by an almost expectant silence. Alex approached the base of the tower, the lantern's green glow casting jagged shadows on its surface. The symbols on the tower pulsed faster, their light growing brighter as she stepped closer. At the heart of the tower was a large, circular stone, its surface etched with intricate patterns. The stone pulsed with an intense, rhythmic light, and the air around it felt thick and charged. Alex hesitated, her hand hovering over the stone. Her instincts screamed at her to stop, but she pushed the fear aside. "I hope this works," she whispered, and she brought the lantern down on the stone with all her strength. The impact sent a shockwave through the cavern, and the stone cracked down the middle. A brilliant light erupted from the fracture, blinding Alex and forcing her to shield her eyes. The tower trembled violently, its walls crumbling as the light consumed it. The shadows emerged from the collapsing tower, their forms no longer flickering but solid and clear. They were no longer twisted or incomplete. They looked human, their eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," one of them said, its voice steady and warm. "You have given us freedom." Alex opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, the cavern began to shake. The air grew heavy, and a deafening roar filled the space. She turned to see the Keeper's form materializing in the center of the cavern, his burning eyes fixed on her. "You dare defy me?" The Keeper's voice boomed, filled with fury. The shadows fled, their forms dissolving into the light as they escaped the cavern. Alex stood frozen, her body trembling under the weight of the Keeper's presence. "I had to," she said, her voice barely audible. "They didn't deserve to be trapped here." The Keeper stepped closer, his towering form casting a shadow over her. "You have interfered with my judgment," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. "Now you must face the consequences." The ground beneath Alex's feet cracked, and she felt herself being pulled downward. She screamed, clutching the lantern tightly as the void consumed her once again. The last thing she saw was the Keeper's burning eyes, watching her as she fell. Alex tumbled through the void, the sensation of falling endless and disorienting. The shadows wrapped around her, whispering incoherent words that seemed to scrape against her thoughts. She clutched the lantern tightly, its faint glow the only anchor in the overwhelming darkness. Finally, with a jarring thud, she landed on a cold, uneven surface. Her head throbbed as she pushed herself up, the air thick with a metallic tang. She was in another cavern, but this one was different. The walls pulsed faintly with a dull red light, and the ground beneath her feet felt alive, throbbing as if it had a heartbeat of its own. A low, rhythmic hum reverberated through the space, setting her teeth on edge. The keeper's voice echoed from the shadows, its tone cold and unwavering. "You have disrupted the balance. Do you think mercy absolves you of consequence?" Alex turned in circles, trying to locate the source of the voice. "I couldn't just leave them there," she shouted, her voice trembling. "They didn't deserve to be trapped like that." The cavern seemed to grow darker, the red light fading to an ominous black. "You presume to understand judgment," the keeper said, his form materializing from the shadows. His towering figure loomed over her, his pale, glowing eyes piercing through the darkness. "You dare to challenge my domain?" Alex took a step back, her heart pounding. "I didn't mean to challenge you," she said, her voice cracking. I couldn't stand by and do nothing." The keeper raised a hand, and the cavern shook violently. Pillars of black stone erupted from the ground, encircling Alex and trapping her in a narrow ring. The lantern flickered, its light dimming as the air grew colder. "If you seek to defy the endless night," the keeper said, "then you must prove your resolve. Face the trials of the Forsaken, and let your actions determine your fate." Before Alex could respond, the ground beneath her feet began to shift. The pillars retracted, and the cavern transformed. The red light returned, illuminating a series of jagged paths that stretched out in different directions, each one disappearing into the darkness. At the center of the space was a large, ornate door, its surface etched with glowing runes. The keeper's voice boomed again. "3 paths, 3 trials. Each will test the strength of your spirit, your heart, and your mind. Only by succeeding will you find the key to the door. Fail, and the endless night will claim you." Alex's knees felt weak as she stared at the paths. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to steady them. "What kind of trials?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The keeper didn't answer. His form dissolved into the shadows, leaving Alex alone in the oppressive silence. The paths loomed before her, each one equally foreboding. She tightened her grip on the lantern, its glow faint but steady. "I don't have a choice," she whispered to herself. "I have to do this." She chose the path to her left, its jagged stones uneven beneath her feet. The air grew colder with each step, and the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They spoke of her failures, her regrets, and her fears, each word a dagger aimed at her resolve. "You abandoned us," one voice hissed. "You're not strong enough," another said, tripping with malice. Alex clenched her teeth, forcing herself to keep moving. The path narrowed, the stones shifting beneath her feet as though trying to throw her off balance. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they were an unbearable cacophony. She stopped, covering her ears. "Stop it," she shouted, her voice echoing into the void. The whispers ceased abruptly, leaving only the sound of her ragged breathing. Ahead, the path opened into a small chamber. At its center stood a mirror, its surface cracked and tarnished. The frame was ornate, carved with intricate designs that seemed to writhe as she approached. The lantern's light dimmed as she stepped closer, and her reflection appeared in the mirror. But it wasn't her reflection. Not exactly. The figure in the mirror was distorted, its face twisted with anger and fear. Its eyes glowed faintly, filled with accusation. "Who are you?" Alex whispered, her voice trembling. The reflection sneered, its voice dripping with contempt. "I am you," it said. "The part of you that you try to bury, the part that you're too afraid to face." Alex shook her head, taking a step back. "No," she said. "That's not me." The reflection laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You can't hide from the truth," it said. "You failed everyone you cared about. You've run from your responsibilities, from your pain. You're weak." Tears welled in Alex's eyes, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Maybe I've made mistakes," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "But that doesn't define me. I'm trying to be better." The reflection's sneer faded, replaced by a flicker of something almost like respect. The cracks in the mirror began to spread, the surface splintering until it shattered completely. The fragments dissolved into light, and a small, glowing key appeared in their place, floating in the air. Alex reached out and took the key, its warmth spreading through her fingers. The lantern flared brighter, its green light turning golden. She turned back to the path, her steps steadier now as she moved forward. The voices in the whispers grew softer, almost approving, as she continued on. 2 more paths awaited her, their challenges unknown. But Alex felt a spark of hope ignite within her. She had faced one trial and emerged stronger. Whatever lay ahead, she was determined to see it through. Alex gripped the glowing key tightly as she stepped back into the central cavern. The jagged paths stretched out before her once more, and the towering door remained locked, its glowing runes pulsating faintly as though waiting for her next move. She glanced at the other 2 paths, her breath hitching at the thought of what trials might await her. The whispers had quieted, but the cavern pulsed with an uneasy energy, as though it were alive and watching her every move. She steeled herself and chose the path to her right. Its stones gleamed faintly in the dim light, and the air felt colder with each step she took. The lantern's golden glow flickered, casting long, wavering shadows on the cavern walls. The narrow path led to a larger chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center stood a massive table made of black stone. Surrounding it were 4 chairs, each occupied by a shadowy figure. The figures were hunched over, their features blurred and indistinct. On the table, a silver goblet rested, its surface shimmering unnaturally as if alive. As Alex stepped closer, the figures lifted their heads in unison, their hollow eyes glowing faintly. One of them spoke, its voice low and echoing. "You have come to take the goblet." Alex hesitated, her fingers tightening around the lantern. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Another figure leaned forward, its movements unnervingly smooth. "It is the essence of sacrifice," it said. "To take it is to give, to lose, to endure. Do you have the strength to pay the price?" The third figure spoke, its tone sharp and mocking. "She doesn't even know what she stands to lose. Foolish girl." Alex's heart pounded in her chest. What is the price?" she asked, her voice trembling. The 4th figure's hollow gaze bore into her. "The price is yours to discover," it said. "But know this, without the goblet, you cannot continue." Alex swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she approached the table. The silver goblet seemed to pulse faintly, as though it were alive. She reached out, her fingers brushing against its cool surface. The moment she touched it, a searing pain shot through her hand, and she gasped, pulling back. The figures around the table laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the chamber. "The path forward is never without pain," one of them said. "Do you dare try again?" Alex's resolve wavered, but she thought of the shadows she had freed, of the trial she had already overcome. She couldn't turn back now. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the goblet again, this time gripping it tightly despite the pain. The moment she lifted it from the table, the room shifted. The figures around her dissolved into mist, and the chamber's walls seemed to close in, the air growing heavy and suffocating. A vision overtook her, vivid and consuming. She was no longer in the cavern, but standing in a familiar room. It was her childhood home, the soft glow of the lamp on the corner table casting a warm light across the walls. She saw herself as a child, sitting on the floor with a book in her hands. Across the room, her mother stood by the window, gazing out at the night sky. The scene was peaceful, comforting, but Alex knew it couldn't last. As if on cue, the warmth faded, replaced by a chilling silence. Her younger self looked up, fear flickering in her wide eyes. Her mother turned from the window, her face pale and sorrowful. "You'll have to be strong, Alex," her mother said, her voice trembling. "Even when I'm gone." Alex's chest tightened, the weight of the memory crashing over her. She tried to speak, to tell her younger self that everything would be okay, but the words caught in her throat. The vision began to dissolve, the room fading into darkness. Her mother's voice lingered, soft and aching. "You must keep going, no matter the cost." The cavern returned, the goblet still in Alex's hands. Tears streamed down her face as the memory lingered, its pain fresh and raw. She set the goblet back on the table, its surface no longer shimmering. Instead, it glowed faintly, its light steady and calm. A new key appeared beside the goblet, its golden hue matching the lantern's now brighter glow. Alex reached for it, her fingers brushing against its warmth. As she held it, the whispers around her softened, their tone almost encouraging. "You have endured the cost," a voice said, gentle and approving. "Take the key and move forward." Alex nodded, her chest still tight with emotion as she left the chamber. The path led her back to the central cavern, where the final path awaited. 2 keys hung from the lantern's handle now, their light joining the glow of the runes on the towering door. She stared at the last path, its darkness seeming to stretch endlessly. "One more," she whispered to herself. "I can do this." The final path felt colder than the others, the air biting against her skin. The lantern's glow flickered, but she held it steady, her resolve stronger now. The whispers were faint, almost melodic, as if urging her onward. The path twisted and turned, the walls closing in until she had to squeeze through narrow passages. Her breathing grew shallow, the air feeling thin and oppressive. Finally, the path opened into a vast, open expanse. The ground beneath her feet was smooth and reflective, like black glass. At the center of the space stood a single figure, its back turned to her. The figure was cloaked in shadows, its form indistinct, but unmistakably human. Alex approached cautiously, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. As she drew closer, the figure turned, and she gasped. It was her own face staring back at her, but twisted with anger and resentment. The shadowy reflection stepped forward, its movements sharp and deliberate. "You've come far," it said, its voice a distorted echo of her own. "But do you really think you're strong enough to finish this?" Alex swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the lantern. "I don't have a choice," she said. "I have to." The reflection laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you're brave, but you're still running," it said. "From your past, from your pain, from yourself." Alex shook her head, stepping closer. "I'm not running," she said firmly. "Not anymore." The reflection's expression shifted, its anger replaced by something almost like sadness. "Then prove it," it said. "Face me." The lantern flared, its light enveloping both Alex and her reflection. The ground beneath them shifted, and the air grew heavy with energy. Alex braced herself, ready for whatever trial awaited her. The lantern's golden light flared brilliantly, flooding the reflective expanse with an intense glow. Alex stood frozen, staring at the shadowy reflection of herself. The distorted version of her mirrored every movement, its expression a twisted mask of anger and defiance. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the glowing light. "You think you can face me?" The reflection sneered, its voice echoing in a distorted, mocking tone. "You've run from everything your whole life. What makes you think this will be any different?" Alex's grip on the lantern tightened. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stand tall despite the fear gnawing at her. "I'm not running anymore," she said, her voice steady. "I've come this far, and I won't stop now." The shadow laughed, a harsh, grating sound that sent chills down her spine. "Brave words," it said. "But words are meaningless without action." The ground beneath Alex's feet trembled, and the reflective surface began to ripple like water. The shadow stepped forward, its movements unnervingly smooth, and raised a hand. From the rippling floor, jagged shards of black glass emerged, floating around the shadow like a protective barrier. Each shard reflected a different memory, fragments of Alex's past that she had buried deep within her mind. One shard showed her walking away from a friend in tears, their arguments still fresh and raw. Another showed her sitting alone in her apartment, ignoring a ringing phone that she knew was her mother's call. Each memory was a sharp reminder of her mistakes, her regrets, her failures. "This is who you are," the shadow said, its voice filled with venom. "A coward. A failure. Someone who runs when things get too hard." Tears welled in Alex's eyes as the memories played out before her. The weight of them was crushing, and for a moment, she felt like giving in. But then she looked at the lantern in her hands, its warm light a reminder of the trials she had already overcome. She had faced the truth of her past, endured the pain of sacrifice, and freed the souls trapped in the endless night. She couldn't give up now. "I'm not that person anymore," Alex said, her voice firm. "I've made mistakes, but they don't define me. I'm stronger than I was, and I won't let you hold me back." The shadow's expression darkened, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Prove it," it hissed, and with a flick of its hand, the shards of glass shot toward Alex like daggers. Alex moved instinctively, raising the lantern in front of her. The golden light flared, forming a protective barrier that deflected the shards. The impact sent ripples of energy through the air, and the shadow let out an enraged scream. "You can't hide behind the light forever," the shadow spat. It lunged at Alex, its movements swift and unpredictable. Alex stepped back, her heart racing as she swung the lantern in an arc. The light struck the shadow, forcing it to recoil, but it quickly recovered, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. "I'm not hiding," Alex said through gritted teeth. "I'm fighting." She focused on the lantern, willing its light to grow stronger. The golden glow intensified, illuminating the entire space and driving back the darkness. The shadow faltered, its form flickering as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. "No," the shadow screamed, its voice filled with desperation. "You can't defeat me. I'm a part of you." Alex stepped forward, her resolve unshaken. "You're right," she said. "You are a part of me, but you don't control me." With those words, she thrust the lantern forward, its light engulfing the shadow completely. The reflection let out a final, anguished cry before dissolving into a cloud of black smoke. The shards of glass shattered, their fragments dissolving into nothingness. The air grew still, and the oppressive weight that had hung over Alex lifted. The reflective floor beneath her feet began to shift, transforming into a smooth, solid surface. At the center of the space, a third key appeared, its golden glow matching the others she had already collected. Alex picked it up, feeling its warmth spread through her fingers. The lantern flared brightly, its light steady and unwavering. "One more step," she whispered to herself, her voice filled with determination. The path led her back to the central cavern, where the towering door awaited. The 3 keys hung from the lantern's handle, their light illuminating the runes on the door. Alex approached, her steps steady and sure. She reached out, placing each key into its corresponding slot. The runes flared brightly, and the door began to creak open, revealing a corridor bathed in a soft, golden light. Alex stepped through the doorway, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The corridor was lined with glowing symbols, their light casting gentle shadows on the walls. At the end of the corridor was a small, circular room. In its center stood a pedestal, and on the pedestal rested a single ornate box. The box pulsed faintly, its surface etched with intricate designs that seemed to shift and change as Alex approached. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the box. The keeper's voice echoed in her mind. "Only by succeeding will you find the key to leave the endless night." Taking a deep breath, Alex placed her hand on the box. The moment she did, a wave of energy surged through her, and the room around her dissolved into light. She felt herself being lifted, weightless and free, as the endless night faded away. When the light subsided, Alex found herself standing in the middle of an open field. The sun was rising, its warm rays casting a golden glow over the landscape. The air was fresh and filled with the scent of blooming flowers. She looked down at the lantern in her hand, its glow now soft and steady. A voice spoke, gentle and reassuring. "You have faced your trials and proven your strength. The keeper's judgment is complete. You are free." Tears welled in Alex's eyes as she took in her surroundings. The weight that had pressed on her for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and clarity. She had faced the darkness within herself and emerged stronger. As she took her first steps into the sunlight, she knew she was no longer the person who had entered the endless night. She was free, not just from the keeper's domain, but from the shadows of her past. The golden field stretched endlessly before Alex, the warmth of the sunlight on her skin, offering a sense of calm she hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. But deep down, she knew her journey wasn't over. The lantern in her hand still glowed faintly, its golden light pulsing like a heartbeat. As she walked forward, the air shifted and the serene landscape began to blur. The ground beneath her feet became softer, almost fluid, and the bright sky dimmed into an overcast gray. Alex's breath caught in her throat as the golden field gave way to a stark, desolate wasteland. The air was heavy, charged with an electric tension, and the only sound was the faint whistle of the wind. Ahead, a massive stone arch loomed, its surface etched with glowing red runes. The arch pulsed with a dark energy that made the hair on the back of Alex's neck stand on end. She tightened her grip on the lantern, its faint glow offering little comfort against the oppressive atmosphere. As she stepped closer to the arch, a figure appeared beneath it. It was cloaked in shadows, its form indistinct but towering. The figure's presence filled the air with a suffocating weight, and Alex's steps faltered. The whispers returned, swirling around her in an unsettling chorus. "You cannot escape. This is where it ends. Turn back now." The figure raised a hand, and the whispers ceased abruptly, leaving a silence that was almost deafening. Its voice was low and resonant, cutting through the stillness like a blade. "You have come far, mortal, but the final trial awaits." Alex swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand tall. "What is the trial?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You must face the truth of the keeper. The endless night exists for a reason. Do you think yourself worthy of leaving it behind?" "I've faced every trial you've put before me," Alex said, her resolve hardening. "I'm not turning back now." The figure stepped aside, gesturing toward the arch. "Then enter," it said. "But know this, not all truths are meant to be seen. If you falter, the endless night will claim you." Alex hesitated for only a moment before stepping through the arch. The air grew colder, and the light from her lantern dimmed as if the darkness were swallowing it. On the other side of the arch was a vast chamber, its walls lined with mirrors. Each mirror was cracked and tarnished, their surfaces reflecting distorted images of the space. At the center of the chamber stood a large, ornate throne carved from black stone. Seated upon it was a figure cloaked in shadows, its form massive and imposing. Its eyes burned with a pale, ghostly light, and its presence filled the chamber with an overwhelming sense of dread. "The keeper," Alex whispered, her voice barely audible. The keeper's gaze fixed on her, its voice echoing through the chamber. "You have come to challenge me," it said, "to escape the endless night. But do you truly understand what it is you seek to leave behind? I just want to go home, Alex said, her voice trembling, but resolute. I've faced my past, my pain, and my fears. I've endured every trial. What more do you want from me? The keeper rose from its throne, its form towering and shifting like smoke. The endless night is not merely a prison, it said. It is a reflection of the soul, a place where truths are laid bare. You have faced much, but you have not yet faced me. The lantern in Alex's hand flared briefly, its light casting long shadows across the chamber. She raised it, the glow steady despite the oppressive darkness. Then I'll face you, she said. I'll face whatever I have to. The keeper extended a hand, and the mirrors lining the walls began to shimmer. One by one, they lit up, each displaying a memory from Alex's life. She saw herself as a child, hiding under her bed as her parents argued in the next room. She saw the day she had walked away from a close friendship, too afraid to confront her own guilt. She saw the countless times she had chosen to run rather than face her problems. Do you see now? The keeper said, its voice softer, but no less powerful. The endless night is not your enemy. It is a mirror, a guide. It exists to show you what you cannot see on your own. Alex's hands trembled as she watched the memories play out. The weight of her failures threatened to crush her, but she forced herself to look closer. Beyond the pain and regret, she saw moments of resilience. Times when she had picked herself up, even when it felt impossible. Moments of kindness and strength that she had forgotten in the shadow of her mistakes. I see it, Alex said, her voice steady. I see the truth, but I also see that I'm more than my failures. I'm more than my past. The mirrors shattered in unison, their fragments dissolving into light. The keeper stepped forward, its towering form shrinking until it was no larger than Alex. Its shadowy cloak dissolved, revealing a figure that looked just like her, but older, wiser, and unburdened. You have faced yourself, the keeper said, its voice now gentle. And you have found what many cannot, the strength to move forward. The endless night no longer holds you. The chamber began to dissolve, the oppressive darkness lifting as golden light filled the space. The lantern in Alex's hand grew brighter, its light warm and comforting. The keeper extended a hand, and Alex hesitated before taking it. The moment their hands touched, a surge of warmth spread through her, and the light engulfed them both. When the light faded, Alex found herself standing at the edge of a forest. The sun was rising, its rays breaking through the trees and bathing the world in golden light. The lantern in her hand no longer glowed, its purpose fulfilled. The keeper's voice echoed faintly in her mind. You are free, but remember, the light within you is your guide. Cherish it, and it will never fade. Tears filled Alex's eyes as she took her first steps forward. The weight of the endless night was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. She didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. As Alex ventured deeper into the golden light, the forest ahead transformed. The trees grew taller, their trunks stretching endlessly into the sky, and the air carried the faint, sweet aroma of blooming flowers. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive darkness she had endured in the endless night. Yet, with each step, a sense of unease began to creep into her thoughts. The keeper's voice had echoed in her mind before she left. The light within you is your guide. Cherish it. The words lingered, both comforting and haunting. The path beneath her feet shimmered faintly, as though it was alive, guiding her forward. Alex clutched the lantern tightly, though its glow had dimmed to a soft warmth. The farther she walked, the quieter the forest became. No birds sang, no leaves rustled, only the sound of her own footsteps echoed in the silence. Suddenly, the path split into two. One trail led into a grove bathed in radiant sunlight, the leaves on the trees glistening like gold. The other disappeared into a dense fog, its entrance shadowed by gnarled branches that twisted like claws. Alex stopped, her breath catching as she considered her options. The sunlight was inviting, almost too perfect, while the fogged path seemed to whisper warnings of danger. "You know the choice you must make," a voice said, startling her. Alex spun around, but no one was there. The voice had been soft, almost familiar, like a memory of someone she couldn't quite place. "The light," Alex whispered to herself. "Trust the light." Despite her instincts screaming to take the sunlit path, Alex turned toward the fog. The moment she stepped onto the shadowed trail, the temperature dropped and the fog thickened, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. The air was heavy, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decay. The whispers returned, faint and indistinct, weaving through the mist. "You don't belong here. Turn back. This isn't your path." Alex pressed on, her heart pounding in her chest. She clutched the lantern tightly, its soft glow cutting through the fog just enough to reveal the path ahead. The whispers grew louder, their tone shifting from warning to accusation. "You failed before. You'll fail again. Why bother? You'll never escape. The endless night is your home." Alex shook her head, her steps faltering but steady. "No," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the whispers. "I've come too far to turn back now." The fog began to shift, swirling faster as if agitated by her defiance. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, their forms fleeting and indistinct. Alex kept moving, her determination growing stronger with each step. The whispers faded, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the ground itself. Ahead, the fog began to thin, revealing a clearing. At its center stood a massive tree, its trunk twisted and ancient, its branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The tree's bark was blackened, and its roots spread across the ground like veins, pulsating faintly with a crimson light. Hanging from the branches were dozens of lanterns, each glowing with a faint, eerie light. Alex approached cautiously, her own lantern flickering as she neared the tree. The hum grew louder, resonating deep within her chest. She could feel the weight of the place, its power both awe-inspiring and oppressive. The air was charged, crackling with an energy that made her skin prickle. As she stepped closer, the ground beneath her feet trembled, and the tree's roots shifted, forming a barrier around the base of the trunk. A figure emerged from the shadows beneath the tree, cloaked in darkness. Its eyes burned with a pale, piercing light, and its presence filled the clearing with an overwhelming sense of dread. "You have come far," the figure said, its voice deep and echoing. "But this is where your journey ends." Alex held her ground, the lantern in her hand glowing brighter. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "I've faced everything you've thrown at me. I'm not stopping now." The figure tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You think you've won," it said. "But the greatest trial lies before you. To leave the endless night, you must make a choice. A sacrifice." Alex swallowed hard, her hands trembling. "What kind of sacrifice?" she asked. The figure extended a hand, and one of the lanterns hanging from the tree floated down, its light pulsing faintly. "Within this lantern is a piece of you," the figure said. "Your pain, your fear, your regrets. You must decide. Will you let it go and leave this place, or will you cling to it and remain bound to the endless night?" Alex stared at the lantern, her chest tightening. The thought of letting go was terrifying, but the alternative, remaining in the endless night forever, was unthinkable. She looked down at the lantern in her own hands, its golden light steady and warm. "How do I know I'll still be me if I let it go?" she asked, her voice trembling. The figure stepped closer, its presence looming. "You will never know," it said. "That is the nature of sacrifice. To move forward, you must embrace the unknown." Tears welled in Alex's eyes as she reached for the hanging lantern. Her fingers brushed against its surface, and a wave of emotions crashed over her. Grief, anger, fear, regret. It was as though every painful memory she had ever experienced was contained within the fragile glow of the light. She hesitated, her hand trembling. "You have the strength," the figure said, its voice softer now. "The light within you will remain, even if you let go of the shadows." Alex took a deep, shuddering breath. She tightened her grip on her own lantern and released the hanging one. The moment she let go, the crimson light within it flared brightly before dissolving into the air. The oppressive weight in the clearing lifted, and the ancient tree began to wither, its branches crumbling into ash. The figure stepped back, its glowing eyes dimming. "You have chosen well," it said. "The endless night no longer holds you." The ground beneath Alex's feet began to glow, and the clearing dissolved into light. She closed her eyes, the warmth of the lantern in her hands spreading through her entire body. When she opened them again, she was standing at the edge of a familiar forest, the morning sun breaking through the trees. The keeper's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "You are free. Go forward and carry the light within you." Alex took a deep breath, the scent of fresh earth and blooming flowers filling her senses. The weight of the endless night was gone, replaced by a profound sense of peace. She looked down at the lantern, its glow now faint but steady. As she stepped into the sunlight, Alex knew that she had changed. She wasn't the same person who had stumbled into the endless night. She was stronger, braver, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. The morning sun stretched its golden rays across the horizon, painting the forest in warm hues. Alex stood at the edge of the trees, the lantern in her hand glowing faintly. She took a deep breath, the fresh air filling her lungs. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt free. But even as the weight of the endless night lifted, a lingering question gnawed at her thoughts. What had she truly left behind? She turned back toward the path she had emerged from, expecting the familiar glow of the keeper's realm. But there was nothing. The forest stretched endlessly, calm and serene, as though the horrors she had endured had never existed. Her fingers tightened around the lantern as she began to walk, each step echoing with uncertainty. The path ahead was different from any she had walked before. The air seemed alive, humming softly, and the ground beneath her feet was smooth and unyielding, as though it had been carved with purpose. The deeper she ventured, the more the forest changed. The trees grew taller and denser, their trunks twisting together to form arches overhead. The light grew dimmer, not from darkness, but from an otherworldly glow that illuminated the space with soft blues and silvers. As she walked, the whispers returned, not the menacing voices of the endless night, but soft, familiar murmurs. They were fragments of conversations, echoes of laughter, and the faintest traces of tears. Alex paused, her heart tightening as she recognized the voices of her past. Her mother's soothing tone, her friend's bright laughter, her own voice, filled with doubt and regret. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself, her breath trembling. The path widened into a clearing, and at its center stood a massive, glowing pool. The water shimmered like liquid starlight, its surface rippling gently despite the still air. Around the pool were dozens of lanterns, each one resting on a pedestal. Their lights flickered softly, some bright and steady, others dim and wavering. The sight filled Alex with both wonder and unease. "You have come far," a voice said, and Alex turned sharply. Standing at the edge of the pool was the keeper, their form no longer cloaked in shadows. They appeared human now, their features soft but ageless, their eyes still glowing faintly. Their presence was no longer oppressive, but it carried a weight that demanded attention. "What is this place?" Alex asked, her voice breaking the stillness. The keeper gestured to the pool and the lanterns. "This is the heart of the endless night," they said. "A place where all who enter leave a piece of themselves behind." Alex's gaze shifted to the pool, her reflection shimmering on its surface. "What did I leave behind?" she asked, her voice trembling. The keeper stepped closer, their expression unreadable. "Your pain, your fear, your regrets, the shadows that bound you to the past. They gestured to one of the pedestals, where a lantern glowed faintly. But not all who come here are willing to let go. Some choose to hold on, and they remain bound to the endless night. Alex's chest tightened as she stared at the lanterns. "Are they still here?" she asked. "The ones who couldn't let go." The keeper nodded slowly. "Their light remains, but they have faded. This place is both their prison and their sanctuary. They are neither here nor gone." Alex took a step toward the pool, the lantern in her hand flickering as she neared. "And what about me?" she asked. "If I've let go, why am I still here?" The keeper's eyes softened. "Because your journey is not yet complete," he said. "The light within you has grown, but it must be shared. The path forward is not one you walk alone." Before Alex could respond, the water in the pool began to swirl. Images formed on its surface, shifting and blending together like pieces of a puzzle. She saw her mother's face, smiling softly. Her friend, the one she had abandoned, reaching out. Strangers she had passed on the street, their expressions flickering with pain and hope. "What is this?" Alex asked, her voice trembling. "The lives you touch," the keeper said. "The choices you make. The light within you can guide others, just as it guided you, but only if you choose to let it." Alex stared at the pool, her reflection rippling as the images faded. Her heart felt heavy, but it was no longer the weight of fear or regret. It was the weight of responsibility, of understanding what her journey had truly meant. "I want to help," she said finally, her voice firm. "I want to share the light." The keeper nodded, a faint smile touching their lips. "Then your path is clear." They reached out, placing a hand on Alex's lantern. The golden glow flared brightly, its warmth spreading through her entire being. The light filled the clearing, illuminating every corner and chasing away the shadows. When the light faded, Alex found herself standing alone at the edge of the pool. The lantern in her hand was no longer glowing, its purpose fulfilled. But within her chest, she felt a warmth that was unshakable, a light that would never fade. The path behind her had vanished, and ahead, a new trail stretched into the distance. The forest was alive with light and sound, birds singing and leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. Alex took a deep breath, her step steady as she began to walk forward. She didn't know where the path would lead, but she knew she wasn't afraid. The keeper's words echoed in her mind. "The light within you is your guide. Share it, and it will grow." As the forest welcomed her, Alex smiled. She was ready to face whatever lay ahead, her heart and soul alight with hope. The forest opened up to a vast expanse of rolling hills, bathed in golden light from a sun that seemed brighter than any Alex had ever known. The lantern in her hand was now dark, its glow extinguished, but she no longer needed its light. The warmth within her chest guided her forward, steady and unwavering. As Alex stepped onto the soft grass of the hills, a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers and fresh earth. She paused to take it all in, her heart swelling with a sense of peace and clarity. The weight of the endless night had been replaced by something lighter, more profound, the understanding that she had faced her shadows and emerged stronger. Ahead, a small village came into view, nestled in the valley below. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, and the distant sound of laughter reached her ears. The sight filled Alex with a mixture of curiosity and hope. She hadn't seen other people in what felt like a lifetime. Her steps quickened as she descended the hill, the village drawing her in like a beacon. The first person she encountered was a young boy, no older than 10, who was chasing a butterfly through the fields at the village's edge. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes widening with surprise. "Hello," he said hesitantly, his voice carrying a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Hi," Alex replied, offering a small smile. "What's your name?" "Sam," he said, tilting his head. "Where did you come from? We don't get many strangers here." Alex hesitated, unsure how to explain. "I came from far away," she said finally. "I've been on a long journey." Sam's eyes lit up with curiosity, A journey? Did you fight monsters? Find treasure? Alex chuckled softly, crouching down to meet his gaze. Not exactly, she said. But I did face some challenges, and I learned a lot about myself along the way. Before Sam could ask more questions, an older woman appeared, her hands dusted with flour from baking. She called out to Sam, who ran to her side, but not before glancing back at Alex with a grin. The woman approached cautiously, her gaze kind but wary. "Welcome," she said, her voice warm but measured. "We don't often see travelers here. Are you looking for a place to rest?" Alex nodded. "If it's not too much trouble," she said. "I've been walking for a long time." The woman smiled, her expression softening. "You're welcome to stay," she said. "We always have room for those in need." As Alex followed her into the village, she noticed the simplicity of the place. It wasn't grand or bustling, but it exuded a quiet charm and a sense of community. People greeted her with cautious smiles, their curiosity evident. She felt a warmth here that was unlike anything she had known before, a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she craved. That evening, the village gathered in the central square, a tradition they held every week. Lanterns hung from trees, their soft glow illuminating the space as people shared stories, songs, and laughter. Alex sat on a wooden bench, watching the scene unfold. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. As the night deepened, an elderly man approached her, his eyes sharp and knowing. He carried a lantern of his own, its light flickering softly. "You carry a different kind of light," he said, his voice low but firm. "One that doesn't come from this world." Alex's breath caught, and she looked down at the now dark lantern in her hands. I came through something called the endless night," she admitted. "I faced trials there. I thought I had left it behind, but—" The man nodded, his expression solemn. "The light you carry isn't just for you," he said. "It's a gift, but also a responsibility. The endless night changes those who pass through it, and the light within you has the power to guide others." Alex felt a weight settle in her chest, but it wasn't the oppressive burden of fear or regret. It was purpose. "How do I use it?" she asked. The man smiled faintly. "By living," he said. "By sharing your light in the smallest of ways. A kind word, a helping hand. It's not about grand gestures, but the quiet moments that change lives." Alex nodded slowly, her gaze lifting to the lanterns hanging in the square. Their light was soft, steady, and beautiful, just like the glow she now carried within her. She realized that her journey wasn't about escaping the darkness. It was about embracing the light and using it to illuminate the paths of others. As the villagers sang and laughed, Alex joined them, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew she would face it with courage and kindness. The keeper's words echoed in her mind one last time. "The light within you is your guide. Share it, and it will grow." And so, Alex did. Step by step, day by day, she carried the light forward, spreading it wherever she went. Her journey had changed her,